Hi everyone, in this video we are going to be working on our last Dollarama bead weaving kit pattern, and that pattern is this diagonal stripe pattern right here. So we've already made all the others and I modified a couple of designs, so you can check out those videos if you like. So when we ran out of ribbon clamps, I went on Amazon and I got these sliding end tube clasps, and they came in a set of various sizes. So I have these other sizes here, and because we went quite wide last week, I thought we would go narrow this week. So one of these narrower ones, and I'm thinking that we would do a 4-row design. Now with this 4-row very narrow design, I thought it would be interesting to make a wrap bracelet. So a really long narrow bracelet that you can wrap around your wrist multiple times to create a stacked effect. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to showing you that, so let's get started. Alright, so to figure out how long of a bracelet we're going to need, I'm just going to take a tape measure and I'm going to wrap it around my wrist about 3 times because I want the wrap bracelet to go around my wrist 3 times. So it looks like I'm at about 17 inches and I want my wrap bracelet to be a little bit loose, so I'm going to give it 18 inches-ish, including the clasp. And so the clasp is going to add about an inch to the final size. So I think I'll make the beaded section 17 inches. And another way that you can do this is just by taking a piece of string and wrapping it around your wrist and then measuring that string with a ruler. So the next thing we need to do is to modify this loom to accommodate making the wrap bracelet. So to do that, I'm just going to take out the knobs and I'm gonna pop out this small piece of wood, and then I'm just going to unscrew the wing nuts from one side. Then I'm going to wiggle this slotted piece of wood out a little bit, and I'm gonna take this piece of wood and I'm just going to wedge it in between these 2 round rods and this slotted piece of wood, like that. And I'm going to put my wing nuts back and tighten them. So the reason why I wedged this piece of wood in between these rods and this slotted piece is because later on when we want to rotate our bracelet to continue weaving along the length of the longer warp, we're going to need to loosen that bracelet a little bit. So when we take out this piece of wood, then that's going to be able to give us a bit of slack to do that. If that sounds confusing right now, don't worry. I'll show you what needs to be done when the time comes. So for now, let's get to how we're going to warp this loom for the wrap bracelet. So to warp this loom, I'm going to be using my Coats & Clark upholstery thread that is 100% nylon in the color green. So I'm just going to pull out a length of this thread to begin with, and I'm going to put the thread under the loom, and I'm going to start somewhere close to the center. And that is because we're not going to need that much warp because there's only going to be 4 rows of beads, so it's not going to be very difficult to center. Then I'm going to tie a double knot somewhere close to the slotted piece of wood around that edge or corner. So I'll tie 1 knot here And then I'll double that knot to secure it. And then I'll tighten that knot to give this warp some good tension. Just pull on it and that knot should move a little bit and give you some tension on your string. There. So now with the spool, I'm going to just go around like this. I'm going to place this thread next to the thread that's already there, and I'm going to flip the loom around and continue to loop this thread around the loom. And I'm going to keep this organized by always putting it in the same direction that I'm going in my slots. So right now I'm going to double the first and the last warps of my bracelet. So I'm going to put another strand in the same slot as before to double that, because that is my first warp strand. And now I'm going to move along and put it next to the string that was already there from the previous time I went around. And so what I meant by keeping things organized is you don't want to just loop around and crisscrossing your thread all over the place. You just want to keep it organized and put your thread next to the thread that was already there in the same direction as the slots. So I'm going to flip my loom around again, and now I'm going to go to the next slot over right there. And go this way, and then flip and keep this string next to the string that was already there, and loop around again. Always keeping your strings parallel and not crisscrossed, and putting this in the next slot over. And I'm going to keep doing this until I have 5 warp strands. So it's not going to take long because it's not that many. So I'm just going to do the whole thing. Alright, so this is my 5th warp strand, and I'm going to double it when I get back to the other side by putting it back into the same slot. So let me just show you that very quickly. So that's 1, it's doubled, so that's considered as 1, 2, 3, 4, and another doubled considered as 1, so 5. So there's 4 slots for the 4 beads in the row that we need to put in place. So when I get to the very end, I'm just going to cut a length of this thread, give it some extra, and I'm going to tie a knot. Let me just light a piece of paper in so that it'll be a lot easier to see. So this is my last warp strand, and this is the doubling. So I'm just gonna tie my knot right here on that last one. And where this first knot is for this first warp strand, I'm going to make my knot also around that corner right there. So that's where my knot is for when I first put on the string. So I'm also going to end my knot around there and just tighten it and then knot it twice. So here's my second knot, and I'm just gonna tighten that, and I'm going to pull. There. So now I have all of my warp threads secure, and I have tied my knots around the same area. So the next thing to do is, if you'd like to add more tension to your strings, you can put a Sharpie here, and you don't have to if you feel like you have enough tension, but it's just a force of habit on my part to do it, so I'm just gonna do it and show you. So I'm just gonna take a super strong, super thick needle, not your beading needle, and I'm just going to use that to get all of the strings, and then I'm going to pop my Sharpie right in there. And that will stretch your warps a little bit and give it more tension. So now we're ready to start looming. So let's take a look at this pattern. So we're gonna need gold, light green, metallic green, and dark green. So this pattern is 7 beads wide, but we only need 4 for this project. So you can just start with any 4 beads in a row that you want to start with. And I'm just gonna start from the leftmost and do 4 from there, but you can also do from the right or from the middle. It doesn't matter because this is a repeating pattern. But I'm just gonna go left to right because it's less confusing, and also because I am right-handed. So if you're left-handed, then you might wanna go in the opposite direction. So for my weft thread, I will be using the John Bead Good thread in black, and I'm gonna be taking out between 5 and 6 feet. So you're not gonna need that much to get very far because this design is quite narrow. So I'm just gonna do that, and we'll probably need to add thread in the middle. So where I'm going to start beading is on the same side and close to where I tied my knots for the vertical warp strand, right there. And the reason for that is because I'm gonna be rotating the bracelet in this direction, that way, to be able to create more length to extend the beaded section to make the long warp bracelet. And I'll explain more later, but basically we don't want the knots to be getting in the way while we are beading in that direction. So we're going to be rotating these knots away from us. And so to start, I'm going to do what we usually do and leave a 6 to 8 inch tail and tie my weft strand to the leftmost vertical warp thread right here. So I'm leaving this much of a tail, and I'm going to start my loom work somewhere here, over here. So I'm going to leave some space between the slotted section and where I start my beading. So now I'm going to put all the rest of my weft thread under the warp strands. And I'm going to thread my size 10 beading needle with the longer end, and we're just going to bead like we normally do. So to read the chart, I'm going to go from left to right, light green, dark green, metallic, dark green. So here are the beads that match the pattern, and I'm going to do what we normally do, which is to pick out squarish beads and even sized beads across all the colors. So we're looking for beads that are not too long and also not too small and narrow. So to put the beads on, I'm just going to slide them under my vertical warp strands and put one bead in each space and push them up with my finger and put my needle over all of the vertical strands and through the beads one at a time, making sure that I do not pierce any of the vertical warp strands. And I'm not gonna worry about the spacings being still a little bit loose. That's gonna be fixed when we do the second row. So here's my second row, and I'm just going to put them on top of the first row like this. And I'm going to put my needle over top again. And this time I'm going to pull the string so that my weft horizontal string tightens up all of the vertical warp strands and they fit the beads, and there are no more spaces between each of the beads. So from here we're just going to continue beading upwards in the pattern until you reach your wrist size. So my wrist is 5.5 inches. I'm going to bead the full 5.5 inches. And I'll meet you back when we're done with that, and we'll switch up our patterns so that when we wrap the bracelet around our wrist, it's gonna look like there are 3 different bracelets stacked one on top of the other. Okay, so I am now at about 5.5 inches of this beaded section, and I still have a little bit of space between where I ended here and the ending of the loom. So I want to bead up until maybe this much more and get a little bit closer to the end of the loom. So I'm gonna start the second pattern. So because this is an even number of warps, then I want to make a pattern that takes advantage of there being an even number of warps. And I think a good pattern for that would be checkers. So I'm just going to do 2 light green and 2 dark green. So I've taken 2 light green and 2 dark green, and I'm going to drop that in. And then I'm going to repeat the row and do another of the same 2 light green and 2 dark green. So now I have a light green square made of 4 beads and a dark green square made of 4 dark green beads. And then I'm going to switch them around and do 2 dark greens and 2 light greens. And again, the same pattern of 2 dark greens and 2 light greens. And so that makes a dark green square and a light green square. And now I have something that looks like a checkerboard pattern. So I'm just going to continue this pattern until I get to about this section, and then I'll show you how to rotate this bracelet so that we can keep beading that way. Okay, so I've beaded until I'm a little bit closer to the end of this loom. So now we are going to loosen this bracelet and rotate it a little bit to make more space to keep beading. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the Sharpie, and then I'm going to remove these wing nuts. And I'm going to pop out this piece of wood that we wedged in there earlier. And then I'm going to put the wing nuts back on because I don't want this slotted piece of wood to accidentally fall out. So now this bracelet is quite loose, so I'm going to rotate the bracelet like this. I'm just going to rotate it because all these warps are just looped around. So I'm just going to rotate it until I have this much of beaded section here. And then I'm going to take the wing nuts off and put the tension back on. So I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to face this slotted piece of wood away from me. And I'm going to take this piece of wood And I'm gonna make sure all of my thread is out of the way so I don't accidentally pinch those threads in. Then I'm going to hold the piece of wood like this, and I'm going to push with my thumb against this slotted piece of wood. So just push with your thumb until this piece of wood falls into that area and gets wedged again. Then I'm going to put the wing nuts back on to secure everything. And if you need to put the Sharpie on, I would put it on this side because you can't put it on this side because your bracelet is over there. So now you have all of this extra space and you can continue beading. So I'm gonna do another 5.5 inches or my wrist size in this checkerboard pattern. Just continue up this way. Okay, so I've just finished my checkered section right there. So the next pattern I'm going to do is just simple stripes. So I'm just going to do one metallic, one opaque, another metallic, and another opaque, and it doesn't matter what the order is. So I'm just going to do 3 rows of the same color in a stripe pattern. So here's 3 rows of the green metallic. And then 3 rows of the dark green. And then 3 rows of gold. And then 3 rows of light green. And I'm just going to continue on this pattern until I get closer to the end, and then I'm going to rotate this bracelet again to make more space, and I'll show you that when we get to that point. Alright, so I have beaded until we're quite close to the end again. So now I'm going to rotate this bracelet again to make space up here. So first thing I'm going to do again is to remove my Sharpie. And then I'm going to remove the 2 wing nuts here. And then I'm going to pop this piece of wood off. And then I'm going to secure this slotted piece of wood back in with the nuts. So now the bracelet is loose again, so I'm going to rotate this again until I have about this much space to continue beading. So now I'm going to turn this back around and remove these wing nuts. And now I'm going to take this piece of wood and I'm going to put it down here on top of the round rods, and I'm going to use both my thumbs to push the piece of wood into place and wedge it again between these rods and the slotted piece of wood. And then I'm going to re-secure everything. Okay, so I finished beading and I've run my tape measure around to see how long this bracelet is so far, and I'm at about 17 inches. So I'm gonna start finishing up and tying up the ends. And if you need a review of how to do that, then I will put a link on my part 4 video from my Dollarama beginner series on how to add thread and tie up ends. So I'm going to be tying up all of the end threads as well as the 2 threads that I have from adding more thread. So to tie up the end, I'm just gonna go back 1 row and come out somewhere in the middle, like right there. And I'm going to go up 1 and catch an upper thread bridge. Like that. And I'm going to tie a knot. And I'm gonna go back in the opposite direction. Then I'm going to go back up and under another upper thread bridge, like that, and tie another knot. And then go back in the other direction and come out again somewhere in the middle. And now that I've tied 2 knots, I'm just going to do some zigzags and a circle. So I'm going to zigzag again in the opposite direction, going up 1 row. Like that. And zigzag again in the opposite direction, going up another row. Like that. And now I'm gonna go back down 1 row to make a little circle loop like that. And from there, I'm just going to cut my thread. So now I'm just going to work on the other end, and also I'm going to rotate my bracelet so that I can work on these ends. Alright, so I'm done weaving in all of my weft thread ends, so I'm just going to remove this bracelet. So I'm just going to loosen up the knobs and I'm going to pop out this piece of wood and set that aside and just push this slotted piece back in and just take the bracelet off. And I'm going to cut the warp thread somewhere in the middle. Alright, so now it's time to secure the warp strands. So you can either put a weight on this or you could secure it with tape. I just happen to have painter's tape, so that's what I'm going to use. And now I'm going to take my leftmost warp strand and I'm going to consider this as 1, and I'm going to take the next one over this one, and I'm going to tie a surgeon's knot. So to tie a surgeon's knot, you're going to cross this left over right, and then you're gonna bring this strand into the loop once and another time, so twice, like this. So you're gonna end up with something that looks pretty twisty, like that. So I'm going to draw this knot all the way to the end, right up against my bead. But before I do that, I'm just gonna add a little bit of Aleene's original tacky glue. So that when I draw down the knot, it's gonna have a little bit of tackiness to it and it's going to secure that knot really well. And then So we went left over right, so now we're gonna go right over left like this. And we're only going to put this through once this time, like that. And draw that down, and we're good. So with these ones, the rightmost strand is doubled, so there's two. And we can't just take one because then there will be a leftover strand over here. So I'm just gonna group these two together, and I'm gonna do my surgeon's knot with these 4 strands. So once again, it's left over right like this, and then put this through the loop twice, like that. So you're gonna end up with something that looks pretty twisty like this. And I'm gonna start drawing that down. But before I do that, I'm going to put some glue close to where my bead is on the strand to give that some tack. And I'm just gonna draw the knot down. And that knot's gonna have some glue in it. So I went left over right that first time, so now I'm gonna go right over left. And then I'm going to then loop this one this way and knot it all the way to that first knot, like that. And then just as an added insurance, I'm going to pop some more glue in there and spread that around. And it's okay to be a bit messy because this first row of beads is going inside the sliding end tube clasp anyway, so it's not going to be seen. So I'm just going to wait for this to dry. Alright, so the glue is pretty dry now, so it's time to put on the sliding end tube clasp. I have 2 sizes here, a wider one and a narrower one. The wider one is just a little bit past the bracelet, and the narrower one is maybe just a hair bit too short. And you know, I like to live on the edge, so I think I'm just gonna use the smaller one. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this piece of tape, and I'm going to trim off the ends from the knots, and I'm gonna give it just a little bit of tail so that I don't accidentally cut my knot. So something like that. I'm gonna open up the flap on the sliding end tube clasp a little wider so that it'll be easier for me to put the beads in. And I'm gonna add a tiny bit of glue into my fixed sewing needle, not your beading needle, just regular giant sewing needle. And I'm just gonna spread a little bit of glue in there. And just a little bit more. Slowly slide this bracelet in. Start to close that up. And then when I have closed it up around that angle, I'm gonna tap this against the table to close it up the rest of the way. And yeah, it's mostly in there. So just do the same for the other side. Alright, so I have successfully attached both sliding and tube clasps, and I was able to miraculously somehow fit everything in. So yeah, let's attach all of our charms and our clasps and see how this goes. So I'll be using only split rings today. Split rings are these like keychain like rings, and they're just more secure than regular jump rings because they don't have an opening really. So I'm going to use my split ring opener tool to just open this up and drop my charms in. So now my charms are in. So now I'm going to open up a slightly larger split ring. This is 7 millimeters and the one for the charms is 5 millimeters. So it's a little bit easier to open up, and I'm going to pop that into my bracelet. And I will also attach my charm split ring in there, like that. Then I will open up the other split ring, attach my lobster clasp, attach the other side of my bracelet, like that. So now my lobster claw is attached. So this is the final result. Here are the charms and the clasp. So the fit is pretty good. And you can make it go like this, or you can also wear them crisscrossed. And I like how all the patterns are different. So I think that this is my favorite design so far, and I can't believe that we have already made 5 bracelets from the Dollarama bead weaving kit. So if you've made any of these bracelets, feel free to post your pieces on my community page on YouTube if you'd like to share. And I'm just so happy that I was able to work on this kit with you guys, and hopefully I'll see you again next week for some exciting new projects. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye!